All righty. It looks like we are live. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is Tuesday, February 5th, 2019. I'm just going to quickly share this on a couple of my other pages and groups. And if you'd like to do the same, feel free to invite some friends, family members, whomever to join in. And then we'll get started in about a minute and 14 seconds. In the meantime, why don't you say hello? And what would be a good one? What haven't we done for a while? Say hello. And I know, are you watching any shows on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or any of those types of things? Is there a show that you would recommend? So say hello, and what show are you currently watching? And then I'm just going to quickly share this on a few of my pages. And then we'll get started here in just a moment. I have, I think, one more to do real fast. And then we'll be ready to go. So say hello, and then what's your favorite show on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, that whole gamut right now? Let's see who's on here. Linda, what's up, Linda? Hey, Stephanie, good to see you on here. I haven't seen you on here for a while. Supernatural. Oh, I've heard about that. I just started watching Merlin. I think it was a show that was on for 6 seasons on a little bit ago, and I love the King Arthur genre. And it's funny. I was thinking about the other day, it's kind of funny watching these shows all in such rapid succession, because you start to see that there's such a formulaic approach to it, where it's literally, put this character in this kind of perilous situation, this will happen, this happens, this happens. It's pretty predictable, but it's kind of fun still. So especially for those types of shows, I really enjoy it. The Blacklist, although I haven't watched it. Hey, Carrie, good to see you on here. Mr. Robot, I haven't heard of that. MASH 4077. Huh, interesting. Very cool. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. It is a little bit later than we usually do these, but we're testing some new times out here as well, I guess we're really just testing some new times out here. And what I'm going to try to do is optimize this as best we can to give the most people possible access to this. A couple quick updates. Be sure you are on the reminder list for the Facebook Lives. The times will be, times are changing. Times change from week to week sometimes. And so the only way to be sure you stay up to date with everything is to be on this list, because we all know how hard it is to get content to show up for us on social media. So make sure you use that. Then, one thing I want to just say real quick and thank you all for. The interaction on here, the support has been amazing. I go back through and reread the comments and the likes and just the love that you all are giving to one another, and it's really, really inspiring, and it's really, really it's so awesome to see. So I appreciate all of you who are interacting on this throughout, who are engaging, who are sharing this, who are hitting those emoji buttons, hitting those like buttons. I know it can be tedious throughout, but the more that we engage in these, the more that it populates out to Facebook, onto YouTube, and the more that we can get these messages in front of other people. On that same note, we are closing in on over 1,400 views for our TED Talk, and that's thanks to all of you. So if you have watched the TED Talk yet, do me a huge favor, leave a thumbs up on it, and then make sure you put a comment on there. Just a quick comment will make all the difference in the world in terms of how YouTube will populate that out to other people. So even if your big takeaway, it could be 10 words, it could be 5 words, it could be something like that, but just something that's kind of an endorsement to help other people find it. And if you haven't seen the TED Talk yet, we need to make sure you get to that, and we'll get that link at the end here. And then last but not least, I think there's 2 spots left in the schedule this week for a strategy session. So if you are someone who is serious about utilizing coaching as a resource to help you get from where you are to where you want to be and really accelerate progress in your life, you can use this link to get one of those last 2 strategy sessions. And we will set up a time to meet this week. And I think that's it for updates. So let's dive into today. shall we? Have you watched Game of Thrones? I have watched Game of Thrones. I had never seen it until this last year. And then it was the first series I actually binged watched. And same kind of reason, because I like that genre and whatnot. And now every now and then when I find myself procrastinating with work and not wanting to do anything, I'll turn on some Game of Thrones clips, which I definitely did a couple times today. Okay, so let's dive into today. First of all, those of you who were on the live yesterday, was it helpful? And do you have any questions about content that we covered? Did it make sense? Was it helpful? Was there anything that needed to be cleared up? Oh, you know what else I was going to say? Those of you who want to participate in the Q&A on Sunday, if I were to put a post up on my main Facebook page and just designated it Q&A Sunday or Q&A Thursday rather, would you all be inclined to go over and input your questions on there? I just want to try to have an efficient way for us to gather and collect questions versus me going back through and scrolling through all the comments. So just as a question, as a feedback, you can make a comment there. Anyways, let's dive into today. So what to do when grief grabs a hold of you and does not seem to want to let go. This is part 2 of our focus this week on healing from loss. And this is a topic I think is extremely important to touch on for a few reasons. Number one, grief is often, I think, one of the most prevalent emotions that I think we experience in a mass amount after loss. And grief is one of the toughest ones to deal with too, because it's an emotion unlike anything else. That we feel at other times in our life. Throughout our life, at different times, we've likely felt sadness. We've likely felt anger. We've likely felt depression. We've likely felt frustration. We've likely felt most of the other emotions in some way, shape, or form. So there's a familiarity to them. When they come, even though they may be more intense than we're used to, we recognize them. It's kind of like that uninvited dinner guest or that annoying aunt and uncle that you don't want to have come over, but there they are anyways. Whereas grief, on the other hand, there's often not a lot of experiences in our emotional experience that it shows up in other than after loss, which is part of the reason why grief is such a not only painful emotion, but it's one that lingers, and it's one that can nag at. It's one that persists for so long, because when it's so unfamiliar, when it's something so foreign, it can be more challenging and more difficult to work through, to process, to release, to let go, and to shift out of it. So what we're going to do today is really focus on that, and especially when those times happen where it really grabs a hold of us. I shared with you all yesterday a little bit of story about how I would find myself at times where I was so grief-stricken, literally on my knees praying for God to end things for me or to find some sort of solution out of the personal hell I seem to have found myself in. And I'm imagining that some of you may have been there as well. When you feel so consumed by grief, when it literally is suffocating you and you're finding it hard to breathe, that there doesn't seem to be an alternative other than well, who knows, other than whatever it is at the moment. But it's so consuming, it's so suffocating that it's hard to even see and experience the idea of life beyond it. So one of the things, there's a couple concepts and ideas around grief that I want to give you. And let me start by this and preface it with this. Grief is an important emotion to feel after loss. What I don't want you to do, especially if you're experiencing a very recent loss, is what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to get into the habit of taking emotions like grief and hiding them under the doormat, sweeping it away with the rest of the dirt, so to speak. Because that dirt doesn't go away. It just accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. I'm doing some moving in my office right now, and I'm going to be reorganizing it and restructuring it. And I'm moving some shelving around that hasn't been moved in years. And as I started to move it today, I couldn't believe how much dust was there. See, and the dust was there because I hadn't cleaned in that area for so long. Much is the same with our emotions. If we don't clean it out, if we don't process it, if we don't express it versus depress it, it's going to stay there. And then what it does is it accumulates and it attracts more and more and more and more. So that's kind of the caveat with this is I want you all to be able to recognize that these are important emotions to process. These are important emotions to express. And I want you to do that. So these tools, these concepts I'm going to share with you today are not what's the term I'm looking for? Are not meant to avoid actually dealing with the emotion and expressing it and experiencing it. But rather what they're to is when you find yourselves getting stuck in it, when you find yourselves going around and around and keep coming back to that, when you find it in that place where it seems really suffocating, these are some resources that you can use to help shift you out of it and get you back to where you want to go and on a path that moves forward and towards healing. So does that make sense? So first thing is I want you to remember when we're in these moments of grief, when it really grabs a hold of us, we want to remember what we talked about yesterday, that our emotions are what we feel, but they're not who we are. The emotions are what we feel and that we're not who we are. Remember, I was talking about the other day that there's a difference between saying, I feel sad versus I am sad. See, I can be Jesse and I can feel sad in moments. You know, I felt some sadness earlier today. It's just, and I know what it was. There's a couple things that happened sequentially that kind of sparked it in my mind. And then my brain, you know, it's kind of like the cat when it sees the shiny object, it sees the shiny object and goes, oh, shiny object. And my brain went, oh, shiny object of sadness. And then I started focusing on it, experiencing it more and more, and I started to feel sad. Now, what's important for me to remember in that moment today when I was feeling sad, or those moments rather, was it was an emotion I was feeling. There wasn't a cause of it. It wasn't who I was. See, our emotions are not our identity. We are human beings. We are who we are, and our emotions are things that we feel. They're what we feel. They're how we're expressing, and they're meant to be expressed. So it's really important that when grief does grab a hold of us and it becomes that almost suffocating claustrophobic feeling, that's not who we are. While it may feel like that at times and it might seem that way, it's all the more important to recognize that's not who we are. That we're a human being, that we're a person, that we're a entity that feels those emotions, but we're not them. So we want to make sure we separate our identities. Grief is an emotion we feel, it's not who we are. Okay, so that's the first big thing with this. The reason why we want to do that is because then we can get on to recognizing that there's three main ways that we create emotion, three what we might call forces that we create emotion. See, our emotions, those of you who watched the TED Talk, you'll recall me saying this, that our emotions do not happen by chance, even though it may seem that way at times. It can seem like that way, right? We're driving along, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems, we start to get this huge wave of sadness. We could be walking down the street and all of a sudden we get smacked across the face with a wave of grief. So our emotions can appear to come from nowhere, that they're happening by chance, but that's not true. What's actually happening is we're creating our emotions, and we're creating them in three primary ways. We're creating them with we're creating them with how we use our physical body. We're creating them with the language we choose. And we're creating them by what we focus on, our thoughts we think, what we're focusing on. So our emotions aren't just happening. Grief doesn't just happen. It happens because one of these things are a combination of two or all three of them. What we think about, what language we use, and how we're holding our physical bodies. So what might really happen when you're walking down the street and all of a sudden you get smacked across the face with this wave of grief is not that it just appears out of nowhere. But what might happen is that there was a smell that was in the air and that you smelt it. And then in your unconscious mind, you thought, wow, that smell reminds me of this certain time 5 years ago that or maybe that smell, I'll use a personal example. The smell reminds me of, I could be walking by a bar. We'll do that. I'm walking by a bar and I see in my peripheral, or I smell some spilled beer. And I think, my gosh, that smell reminds me of Dad. And then in my peripheral, as I'm walking, I notice a Corona bottle. Now this is all happening unconsciously, right? I'm just walking, I'm going somewhere. I'm not really consciously aware of this. but it's happening in my unconscious, my unconscious awareness. And so because my dad used to drink Corona and I smell the beer and I see the Corona in my peripheral, I start to think of my dad and I start to think of how he's not here. And I start to think about maybe that I'm never going to be able to have that experience with him. And as I do that, unbeknownst to me, I start to slouch a little bit in my posture. Okay, so what is happening here? What I'm focusing on, right? I'm focusing on my dad not being here. The language I'm using is I'll never have that again. My physiology is starting to change where I'm going down, I'm shrinking my posture. And then all of a sudden, before I know it, bam, I get hit with this wave of grief. Now, the worst thing I can do in that situation is to say, oh my God, here's this grief. I have no control over it. It has control over me. There's nothing I can do. I'm powerless to change this, because it's not true. See, what really happened there is I created that experience by what I was focusing on, right? How I used my physiology, and then the language I chose. Now, all this was happening super fast, way beyond my conscious awareness, right? And this is how we usually experience emotions, right? Before we know it, isn't that what we say? Before we know it, bam, you feel this emotion. And that's going to happen. When I experienced the sadness today, it was literally, bam, all of a sudden, wow, I feel sad. But where I'm able to shift it now is because I recognize that it's not just happening by chance, that I was actually creating it. So I could start to dissect it and say, okay, what was I focusing on? What was I doing with my body? How was I using my language? So language, we talked about that yesterday, right? If we use things like, I'll never be happy again, I'll never love again. Guess what? If you're reinforcing that over and over and over again, I'll never feel this way again. That's probably true. Because what we're saying is that the emotions that we're associating with our loved ones in those moments, love, happiness, joy, fulfillment, or our identities, we talked about identity and loss, or our careers, or the ends of our relationships. What we're telling ourselves is that we will never experience the good stuff in life again. And that's a pretty steep hill to climb up. So here we are feeling and mourning the loss, but then we're going to heap a whole hell of a lot extra challenge on it. You're making it a pretty much impossible mountain to climb now at that point. Okay, physiology. We talked about the physiology yesterday. Remember when I had you use the example of focusing on something that makes you happy, focusing on something that makes you sad? And there was a physiological shift, right? When we're happy, we're spinning a certain way, our smile goes up, our posture is better. But when we're sad, we start to drop, our breath changes and everything, right? I don't even have to tell you this. If I just tell you, imagine being sad, your physiology will respond. If I tell you, imagine being happy, your physiology will respond. So remember, what we focus on, we're going to experience. So our emotions, we're always creating our emotions, whether it's grief, sadness, despair, loneliness, whatever that case may be, we're creating these emotions. We're creating them. Now, I hope this is empowering instead of discouraging, because if we create them, it means that we have a say-so in creating an alternative, and then also slipping out of the grasp of emotions like grief when they grab a hold of us and don't seem to want to let go. All right, is this making sense so far? And is this helpful? Questions about anything so far? I just want to make sure you all are with me. Any questions about this? And is this making sense? I wish I had my water over here. I didn't bring it with me. Questions. So there might be a little bit of a delay again. Making sense. Cool. Okay, so, and I'll have maybe a few more minutes here. Then I want to open this up for questions. So please be thinking about questions, because I think that we could have a really cool discussion around this, and I want to make sure everybody's getting this. So here we are. We have these three forces, these three ways that we experience emotion, that we create emotion. And this is the whole spectrum of emotions, whether it's happiness, joy, love, to sadness, grief, depression, despair, right? We're creating them always by using these three main forces. Now, and this is really important to remember, that most of this we're never going to be consciously aware of, right? We're just not, because we're going through, and the amount of information our conscious mind can process and our unconscious mind, it's not even comparable, right? The average person thinks anywhere from 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day. We remember a small handful of them. It gets to the point that I was listening to an interview earlier today that something like 70 to 90% of those thoughts are repetitive, but we're not even aware of most of them. But most of them are happening over and over in our unconscious mind. So we're feeding whatever it is we're feeling. And part of the healing process is to recognize that we have other emotions available to us. So this is going to lead us on to the third thing I want to give you today. So we have these three forces. We've recognized that we are ourselves, and our emotions are what we feel. They're not who we are. We recognize that we're creating our emotions with what we focus on, the language we choose, and how we use our physiology. So now that we know that we can do that, we have that awareness, we can shift it. Here's what we can do. When we're in the middle, or when we feel grief grab a hold of us, and we have this awareness of, okay, I'm creating this. Now, something really important with this. I would argue and say that there's a certain amount of healthy emotion that you're to feel. When I felt the sadness today, I allowed myself to feel it for a minute because I trusted that there was an emotion I needed to feel. But when it started to go into a self-destructive place where I started to compile it with negative self-talk, which sometimes we might do with grief or other emotions, right? We feel the emotion, but then we start to compile it. So my stacking of it was, okay, I feel sad. I'm not making as much money as I want. I'm not helping as many people as I want. I want to be able to help 1 million people this year. How am I going to do that? I'm not anywhere near that goal yet. My TED Talk isn't reaching the audience I want. Then I go into a loser and all these other things. You jerk, you're wasting time, blah, 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 right? So that's kind of how I start compiling, where my mind starts to go. And so that would be the part where it goes from a healthy feeling of sadness, there's an emotion that I felt and I need to process it, to now me going to the garden and saying, okay, here, let me get all the really nasty stuff that I could water and fertilize with this. And I start pouring it in there in mass and just saying, okay, I'm going to really just give myself an emotional ringer right now. So when you start to find yourself in that space, this is where you want to shift. You want to stop and say, okay, wait, I'm creating this by what I'm focusing on, the language I'm choosing, and how I'm using my physiology. So the fastest way to shift out of this, to just give yourself a little breath of fresh air, is through your physiology. If you were to, let's just say you felt sadness or grief right now, but if you were to stand up and just bounce around on your toes, you would notice that the emotion, at least the intensity of it, would minimize, maybe even dissipate altogether, right? Because you're shifting your physiology. If you dropped down and did some push-ups right away, you would have a shift in it. If you did something silly like that, you would notice that there was a shift in it, because a quick change in physiology and how you use your physical body is going to cause a quick change in emotion. If you immediately shifted your focus to something like, so for example, I was sad, and then if I were to shift my focus to like a funny clip in South Park, I love South Park, so there might be a line in South Park that I'd recite in my head. Generally, I think physiology is going to be the fastest. It's going to be easiest. We all have access to our bodies. After that is going to either, I would say, we can usually change focus a little faster than language. The reason I say that is because when we're starting to write out the story of our woe with our language, if we don't give ourselves supporting evidence about why that's not true, we can sit there, we can start to change our language, and we can just say, oh, that's bullshit. I'm lying to myself, right? You all know what I mean by that. So if we try to say or change our language, think positive or whatever, but we're not feeling very positive, all the positive stuff we try to think just seems condescending, and it seems like it's a bunch of horse pucky anyways. So we want to focus on physiology first, focus, and then language. Now, here's what's really important. As soon as you feel a little bit of a release, so I feel some grief, it's really intense, I'm starting to compact it, I'm going down the bad path. Okay, I remember I can bounce around on my toes, I can shake my hands out, it's going to make me feel a little different. As soon as you feel a release, you have to quickly determine what you would like to feel, focus on instead, experience instead, and then you must immediately, and I'm not saying like, okay, you're going to put it down and say, wow, that would work kind of well. I'm going to message Jesse right now and tell him, hey, that really is really helpful, and then come back to it. I'm saying immediately, like the second you feel something release, then you must immediately take action towards what you want to feel instead. Okay, so immediately take action towards what you want to feel instead, or what you want to experience instead. So when I did the sadness, let's go back to my sadness, I have this really intense grief. I bounce around, I get a little bit of relief, and I say, okay, instead in this moment right now, I'd like to feel excited. What is an action I can take right away that helps me feel excited? Well, I could write out the outline for Facebook Live today because I love doing those. Guess what I did after I got out of feeling excited? Wrote out the outline for Facebook Live, and I got excited about talking with all of you. Let's say it's not exciting. Let's just say it's something. It's something else. I want to feel happy. Okay, well, what is something that makes me feel happy? Well, this memory that I have, a special time with my dad, or a memory that I have taking road trips with my mom. Any of those types of things, right? And then take an action to support that right away. Pull up pictures, go on to Facebook, something like that. See, what's imperative is we have to take action right away to shift, because if we don't and we allow ourselves to just be, the feather in the wind, so to speak, we're going to go right through this process again and again and again. The reason people will get stuck in these emotional states, they'll find themselves trapped there, is because what happens is they start to hardwire their brain to default to this. And this becomes the primary program, right? I wake up in the morning, instead of stretching my arms out overhead and opening up, I wake up in the morning and immediately go, oh, God. I really have to go through another day. Versus just waking up in the morning and saying, thank you. I know I'm going through a hard time right now. I know life is really challenging. It may not be the best, but my God, I woke up. I can see, I can breathe. That puts me ahead of a hell of a lot of other people. All of us are going to be on different paths in our own journeys. And even if we're at the tail end of one, there could be another loss on the horizon. That's going to be something else that we have to deal with, that we have to work through. So remember that what I'm sharing with you today is not meant to take away the healthy emotion that we're supposed to feel, that we should process. What it is meant to do is it's meant to give you some resources, some tools, some strategies for recognizing that you're not powerless to change the emotion. You're not powerless to get yourself out of a stuck space, and you are powerful to heal. Incidentally, speaking of healing, we dive into all this in much greater depth in the Healing from Loss course, which I mentioned yesterday. And I really, really encourage some of you to jump on board and take advantage of that. It's such a cool program, and I think it's a deeply meaningful and powerful one that you can do from the safety of your own home. And you can really make some profound and long-lasting shifts and changes from it. And so we get to in all that in much greater depth in there. But the bigger thing with this is remember, our emotions are not happening by chance, even though it may seem that way. We're always creating our emotions. We're always creating our emotional experience by what we choose to focus on, the language you use, and what we're feeling, or how we're using our physiology. And at any given time, you have the ability to change that. You have the ability to shift it. You will not change it and you will not shift it by just compounding it. So if you start to feel a heavy bout of grief or sadness, to lower yourself even more and then start the language of, oh my God, I'm so horrible, how guilty I am. Sometimes that's going to happen, right? And remember that in any given time during that, you have the ability to shift it. So there's a healthy amount of emotion to feel. There's a healthy amount of emotion to express. Where this is going to be most effective and is going to serve you the best is when you start to get away from feeling that healthy emotion, allowing yourself to process it out. And then you start storytelling that adds more emotional fuel to the fire. It's like saying, okay, here's this fire that we call grief that's burning really hot. And then you say, rather than, okay, you have a bucket of gasoline and a bucket of water, I'm going to go get the bucket of water and start putting this thing out. You go and grab the bucket of gasoline and say, oh, hey, let's really turn this mother up. That's what happens if we're not intentional with this. So real quick recap, and then we'll open up for questions and comments. 3 things that we covered today, right? Remember, be clear what we talked about yesterday. We're not what we feel. Our identities are not our emotions. We're who we are, and then emotions are what we feel. That there's 3 ways we're creating our emotions: what we focus on, the language we choose, our physiology, Why did my brain just go blank? The language you choose, what we focus on in our physiology. Gosh, my brain just completely. I think what I'm realizing here is 5 o'clock might be a little late for my brain to be doing these. We gotta keep these at 4. And then lastly, as soon as we create a space, right? As soon as we create a space in that we do a quick shift in our physiology, we do a quick change in our focus, we do a quick change in our language, we must immediately identify what we'd like to feel or experience instead, and then take immediate action to that. The worst thing we can do is just stay there in limbo and just allow ourselves to go back to things happening by chance and hope that we just go out of this, deep grief and think that, oh, we can just let there and all of a sudden birds and rainbows are going to come. And it's not going to happen. We have to put in the work. We have to work with ourselves to work through the emotions to get to the other side. So that's what I have for you all today. Number 1, has this been helpful? And then number 2, what questions, comments do you have? I have 10, 15 minutes or so, and I would love to answer any questions and comments you have about this. Beating yourself up is easy. Building yourself up is hard work. Yeah, that's well said, Stephanie. I totally agree. Question: after my dad died, I would find myself feeling sad without even really knowing why. And then I would think about and realize it was his birthday or the day he died, his funeral, etc. Does it make sense that you can feel sad without knowing why? Yeah, 100%, Violet. So remember, most of our emotional responses, we're constructing them unconsciously. The example I used earlier about me walking down the street, and I might walk down the street and going from point A to point B, and I walk by a bar and I smell beer. And because I smell beer, it triggers something in my brain that has my peripheral vision wandering. And then in my peripheral vision, I see an advertisement for Corona. And because my dad liked to drink Corona beer, then I start to think of my dad. Now, I'm not even consciously aware I'm doing this. It's all happening unconsciously. And now, because I'm starting to think of my dad, I might think, wow, I'll never have a beer with my dad ever. I blew that opportunity, whatever that is. And then the next thing I know, I'm starting to feel really sad. I'm starting to feel really upset. I feel grief, whatever that case may be. So again, our emotions aren't happening by chance. What's important with those types of things is what we don't want to do is we don't want to say, oh my God, in your example, Violet, oh my God, I feel sad and I don't know why. And now I'm sad, I don't know what to do. Acknowledging that you created the sadness is key, because just by simply saying that you created it, and there's nothing wrong with creating it. There's nothing wrong with finding yourself in a space where grief grabs a hold of you or where you feel some sadness and you don't even know why. But why it's important to acknowledge that you created it, because if you say and take ownership that you created it, it gives you the power to create an alternative. If you don't, and you just throw it out there and say, basically, holy fuck, I'm feeling this way. I don't know why, and I don't know how, and there's nothing I can do. That's the worst thing you can do, because it basically says you're powerless. I sometimes use the example of, everybody's seen Forrest Gump, right? And the feather in the beginning and the feather in the end, it comes blowing in on the wind, and we're all watching the feather. You don't want to be the feather. You want to be the wind, because the feather is always at the mercy of the wind. Wherever the wind blows, the feather is going to go. But the wind gets to choose where the feather goes, right? You want to be able to recognize and acknowledge, okay, I created this. I created it. I'm feeling right now, but because I created it, I also have the power and the ability to create an alternative. Is that helpful, Violet? Good question. That will be my new wake up in the morning prayer. That's awesome. I try and use monkey faces when I wake up sad. It's hard to be sad when you're making faces at yourself. It's a tool Jesse gave me. Yeah, keep using those monkey faces. I'm glad you're still using them, Stephanie. It's awesome. But use the tools you have given me. I have thyroid issues and Hashimoto's, which can cause brain issues and psychiatric issues. I'm looking into getting more help with this. I'm still struggling. So it's not all about what shit has happened to you, but sometimes it can be health related, especially if your thyroid is related. So here's what I would say about that. I am all for one of taking as much personal power as possible. And the reason is because the second I start to give any of my power away to some sort of external cause, then it puts me in a place where I'm powerless to do anything to control it. So all of you, I'll use my back as an example. Most of you have been around the last couple of weeks, and my back went out really bad. I've shared with you that I have some pretty severe spinal challenges. I've had spinal issues my whole life. If you look at my MRI of my lumbar spine, the entire lumbar is either ruptured, herniated, or bulging. I mean, it's the disc between the discs are supposed to be like this color, right? And they're the cushion between them, and they're all black like this. And when it really goes and really gives me problem, the nerve stuff will be so bad that I won't be able to move, and it'll literally keep me frozen and trying to work through it. So now I have choices with that, right? I can sit there and say, there's nothing I can do because this is just a situation I'm in. Or I could say, and I'm powerless to do anything because this is how my spine is. Or I could say, well, I know before that I was having some good days and I had a lot of good days before. So what I can do now is figure out what was I doing that led to all those good days and what did I do differently that led to these bad ones. There was an interview I was listening to the other day, and the guy was talking about how he was a high-level triathlete. And he was going through this intersection in the middle of a race, and this big Bronco, not OJ's Bronco, but this big Bronco went through there. For whatever reason, that popped up and seemed really funny because I don't ever say Bronco out loud and think of a Bronco going through it. Anyways, this Bronco went through, clipped his bike going 50 miles an hour. It just launched him, and he landed, and it caused this basically sequence where it compressed his spine, it blew out his vertebrae, cracked his spine in multiple places. He had consults with four of the top spine surgeons and specialists in the Southern California area, some of the best in the world. And all of them unanimously said that you need to have this surgery. If you don't, you might never walk again. You might be stuck in a wheelchair the rest of your life, and so on. And so he was about to have the surgery, but then there was this voice inside of him that was saying, what did it say? It's basically like what created life can heal, or something like that. But the underlying message was that he could heal internally, that he could create a healing mechanism inside of him. Now, keep in mind, this is completely contradictory to anything that's out in the medical community. And so what he started to do is he would start to just focus on literally repairing his spine vertebrae by vertebrae, and he'd do this every single day. And when he first started doing it, it would take him sometimes 3 to 6 hours a day to try to focus on it because his mind would wander. Any of you have ever tried to meditate before, try to focus on things, our minds may wander. But he was unrelenting in it. He was determined to try this route. And so where it started as a 3 to 6 hour endeavor, eventually with time and consistently did this every single day, it got a little bit more efficient. At the end of 6.5 weeks after having this life-altering surgery, every experience where everybody said he was going to be, he'd have to wear a body cast for a year. He might not be able to walk again. He'd have to have all the surgery. He was back to training on his bike. He was moving again, and then when he'd go in for checkups, the results were proven like it was defied any sort of medical expectation because he took ownership of it in there. So what I would say to you, Linda, and everyone else who's out there is be really, really cautious when you voluntarily give away power, because here's the thing. We might have an illness and a disease, and Violet's a great example of this, and she mentioned it yesterday. One of the times I first met Violet was really struggling because she defined herself by her MS. But now Violet is Violet, and it's this thing that she has. It's this disease she has, but it's not who she is. And so what she's done and why she's been so successful in changing her life and starting her business is because rather than allowing the disease to define her, she's been really intentional about defining it. So be really, really careful about when we volunteer power over to illnesses or anything like that, because once we start doing that, we give away our greatest resource, which is our resource of choice. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome to get Schaff. Hey, Renata, good to see you on here. Your subconscious allowing you to remember, and perhaps, yep. I hate the internet some days. I have been sick for over a year and they can't diagnose it, not even me. I refuse to let my health ruin my mind and heart. It took me 11 years to get here. I lost 11 years of living and loving. I face my health issues daily, but I don't let it define me. It's so, and I really acknowledge you with that, Stephanie. And here's what I choose to believe. And keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV or anything like that. But I really choose to believe that there's so much that is even beyond our realm of comprehension yet that we can do in here and in here. I think that the human mind, the human heart, the human emotions, it's we haven't even begun to tap into the potential of what it can create. I mean, hell, look at, we're able to, there's people in here from all over the world right now, and we're able to create this. And any of you who watched my interview series with my friend John when he had ALS, right? Here's this man with ALS, a degenerative neuromuscular disease, where each and every day, literally day by day, hour by hour, he's losing the physical ability to do the things most of us take for granted. He lived the last year of his life not able to feed himself, not able to dress himself, not able to wipe his own ass after he went to the bathroom. And I don't say that to be graphic. I say it to impress upon us that here's this man doing that. And him, by his own admission, and I have it on camera, said that the last 2 years of his life living with ALS were the happiest 2 years of his life. The happiest 2 years. And this was a person who is literally the stereotypical man's man, and had said, was adamant that the day that he couldn't get dressed, the day he couldn't take care of himself, the day he couldn't feed himself, wipe his own ass, he didn't want to deal with it anymore. But yet he continued on for over a year like that, because even he didn't allow his illness to define him. He defined it. And he lived the happiest 2 years because he made it a purpose. So I think that there is just so much inside of here and here that we don't even know. And we're so quick to just say that this is the only way out. Keep exploring, keep looking at your own inner healing. You know, one of the things, just as a quick aside from that, I used to get 4 colds a year without fail, at least 4 colds a year. And I used to get severe allergies too. And then I just, I'd start saying, I said, how much of this am I creating versus how much of it is actually real? There's always a cold season, right? Whenever you hear somebody sneeze, you think, oh God, don't get near me, because if you get near me, I might get sick. We hear somebody cough, don't get near me, I might get sick. And I decided one year, I said, what? I'm not going to buy into this bullshit anymore. I'm going to do everything the exact opposite, because I'm going to form the belief that I have control of my health, that I can dictate what's going in and out of my immune system and how strong my immune system is. So I started doing stuff completely different. I would pick food up off the floor and eat it. If somebody who I knew was sick, they had a cough, they had a cold, I would have them use their spoon to feed themselves or drink out of their cup, and then I would take it and drink out of it or use their spoon. All the things that if somebody was sick and you would normally quarantine them and say, stay away, say, oh, come hang out, come hang out. I'd sit right by them. I'd sit there when they're coughing, all those types of things. And since that time, this was probably, 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, I have had maybe 2 colds, And I was a 3 to 4 cold a year person on average. So think about that. I went from, let's just say it's 7 years, I would have had 21 to 28 colds, and I've had maybe two. And I really believe it's this. Let's see. I have time for one more quick question or comment. Any other questions? Has this been helpful? Good? I believe you are, Stephanie. I know you are. All right. I don't see anything else. So quick reminder, if you want to dive in deeper to all this and get some at-home support for healing from your losses, I encourage you to check out my Healing from Loss course. You can get access to it here. Remember, it normally runs for $297. I'm offering it for $97 this week during the Healing from Loss, doing this focus on healing from loss this week. So you can use that link I just put in there to get access to that. If you have questions about it, if it's right for you, if it's the right time for you to get it, let me know. I'll be happy